We're going to go ahead and get started here with our deep dive webinar series on QuickBooks Enterprise. And today we're going to be specifically talking about prepaid expenses. So first off, a little bit about Fourlane. So we have what we like to call our 4 uniques. So first and foremost, we are QuickBooks NetSuite Zero and Acumatica value added resellers. That makes our firm unique in that we can help implement QuickBooks and other ERP systems, or potentially identify if folks are trying to move from QuickBooks to another product or another product into QuickBooks, if their needs could be met in the product that they're already in. We also have ERP consultants that are experts at maximizing QuickBooks. So we have quite a few clients that come to us thinking they need to move to NetSuite or move to Acumatica, and we're really great at finding ways to keep them in QuickBooks so that they're not having to have those additional software and implementation costs. We are also experts in accounting and software, so we don't just understand, the system side. We also get the financial piece, right? So understanding the impact of changes that we're making process-wise on different reports, like our balance sheet and profit and loss and all that fun stuff. And then we are your strategic partner for change management. So we work with your team to empower them, right? This is going to be their system and their home, right, that they're functioning and moving forward. So we want to make sure that we get buy-in from all of those stakeholders on your team. Topics we're going to cover today. So first off, we're going to define what are prepaid expenses. We're also going to be looking at how we set that up in QuickBooks and how we're going to use those, and then also reporting and reconciliation. So we'll go ahead and get right into it here. All right, so we are now in QuickBooks Enterprise, and first off, we're going to talk about what is a prepaid expense, right? So a prepaid expense is any time I might pay an expense, right? So have a bill entered for an expense or potentially write a check for an expense, that expense or that bill is not going to be dated in the same month that I'm going to have that expense. So, or that expense pertains to. So in the case of rent, right, we might have a prepaid expense for rent every single month that we recognize the month that we're actually going to have rent. So we might cut our check for rent on the 25th of, April as an example, but it's for May rent. So that would be one example. We may also have service providers that we're paying, for several periods up front, right? So we might pay our IT provider, as an example, 3 months for 3 months worth of services. So let's say we have, $12,000 that we're going to pay them for Q2, right? We may have paid that at the end of March, and then that's going to be used, right? Those services are going to be used April, May, and June. We may also have some software subscriptions, that kind of stuff that we're paying on an annual basis. So we might pay those, they could be paid in February, and that could run for March through the following February. Or insurance is another one as well that we've seen quite a bit, that we're prepaying liability insurance and that kind of thing. Instead of monthly, we're paying it for the duration of that period. So it is important because we want to, in QuickBooks, right, in any accounting system, we want to be able to see that we have consistent reporting, especially around our general and advertising expenses on a month-over-month basis. That will also help for budgeting purposes. But when we look at our profit and loss, one of the things that we even look at on a file review, if you've ever had one of those from us before, is we take a peek at what do our expenses look like month over month. Right? Do we see any big swings in, well, that's gross wages, so we might see big swings there. Do we see any big swings in things that we would not expect to see those wild swings in? Rent, utilities, right? Those should be staying relatively the same month over month. And so if we see something like dues and subscriptions have a big $12,000 entry in January and nothing for the rest of those months, then we know that we need to work with the client to get prepaid expenses set up. Also for budgeting, right, we want to make sure that we're keeping those general and admin type expenses consistent. So if we need to scale back in certain areas, it's easier to identify and pinpoint those. And then, for our month over month budgeting, we should be able to keep relatively consistent, month over month expenses in those different areas. So first and foremost, we're going to go ahead and set up what we need in the file for prepaid expenses. So we are going to be creating an account for this. So I'm going to go to my chart of accounts and I'm going to say new. And this account type is going to be an other current asset account. And I'm calling it an other current asset account because I am expecting anything that I put in this account to be used within 1 year of when I put it in here. So it might not be used within that same year, right? Same calendar year or same fiscal year, but I'm not going to expect things to be sitting in this account over a period of 2 to 5 years, right? So if we put down, we sign a new lease agreement and we put down a security deposit, that would likely be going to an other asset account, not an other current asset account, especially if that lease period is more than a year. So we're going to call it other current asset. And then I'm going to keep this example pretty simple. If we have clients that have a number of prepaid expenses, so I'm going to call this prepaid expenses, we may have sub-accounts under there as well. So sometimes clients will have like quite a bit of prepaid expenses, so it helps them on their balance sheet to see those prepaid expenses by different types. We strongly discourage keeping them on there by vendor, right? So I wouldn't have like Blue Cross Blue Shield be an account name, because if I ever switch providers, now I'm stuck with Blue Cross Blue Shield forever. So we would instead call it insurance, and we'll see at the end how we can look at what our expenses are by vendor in some of our reporting and reconciliations. But this isn't required. We definitely want to have a prepaid expenses account. But again, if you have a lot of prepaid expenses, you could set up sub-accounts for your different types as well. So that is an option. But I'm going to keep it simple here. So we're just going to have our prepaid expenses. And I'm going to pretend also for this example that we are prepaying 1 quarter of outsourced IT service, and we're prepaying for Q2. And we're going to actually backdate this entry. I'm going to say that we paid it on March 31st. So I'm going to write a check. And I'm going to date this check. Let's just say we paid it on March 31st. And I'm going to write it to my IT provider. I'm just going to set up a new vendor here. And we'll just do quick add. And let's pretend that I'm prepaying them $3,000. Now on my expenses line here, right, if I was not utilizing prepaid expenses, I would probably be putting this to like an outside services account. If I did that, then I'm going to see that $3,000 expense hit all in March. I'm not going to see anything hit for April, nothing hit for May, and then I would see, another $3,000 maybe hit in June when I'm prepaying for Q3. So you can see how that would definitely cause some ups and downs on our profit and loss. We would definitely see a wiggle, you're right, when we're looking at our overall net ordinary income as well. So that's why we want to utilize prepaid expenses. Now, you kind of have to decide that might be where you don't want to use it or where you would want to use it. But, if we're prepaying something that's, maybe it's a $10 per month and we're paying an annual subscription, right? That wouldn't necessarily be something that we want to go through this process because it does take some time. So you just kind of have to decide for your business what's going to work. So I'm going to change my prepaid expenses account or my expenses tab account to prepaid expenses. And I'm going to say save and close. Now, if I go and run now my balance sheet as of 3/31, I can see that I've got $3,000 in prepaid expenses. So there was no impact on my profit and loss as of March for that $3,000 that I paid. What I also like to do on these specific checks down here in the memo, I will usually put what the period is that this is for. So in this case, I might put 4/1/2023 through 6/30/2023, right? If it's one quarter. That will also impact some of my reporting. So that's something important to have on the memo. I don't need to put a name. It will already assign a source name to this because I'm paying it to a vendor. So I don't need to put anything over here. But definitely having that memo is good to have for reporting purposes. So then what I also do when I put anything into prepaid, there may be some disagreement around this, but I like to go ahead and just put in my journal entries to write down this prepaid when I see it hit on my balance sheet. So if I don't do it right when I write that check, or maybe somebody else is responsible for doing those prepaid expenses, you would want to make it part of that month-end close process that you go ahead and get those all booked out, because making sure that you do it the one time, right, and getting them all booked out and make sure that you're marking down the right amount each month, everything is consistent, all that fun stuff. So what I'm going to do now, so I've got my 3,000 in there, I'm going to go ahead and say company create or make general journal entries. And I'm going to credit. And I'm going to put here for my memo 4/1/2023 through 4/30/2023. Same thing on here. Let me just copy that. And then I also put my vendor on both lines. It is definitely important that we have it on this prepaid expenses line, because you're going to see how that impacts some of our reporting that we're going to be able to pull when we're looking at what we have in our prepaid expenses account at the end of the month and how we can reconcile that to what we have outstanding for each vendor. But I also like to put it in outside services, right, on that line as well, because when I go and look, maybe if I'm doing some budget planning for next year and I want to look at how much I paid to each vendor in my outside services, I definitely want to make sure that I have that vendor assigned to that expense line as well, because everything's going to be going to prepaid. So we just want to make sure we can also see that. So then I'm just going to save this journal entry, and then I'm just going to duplicate it. So I don't have to keep rekeying a lot of the same stuff. I'm just going to update my dates. And then I'm also going to do June. Okay, so now if I go and run my balance sheet, and we'll just run this for all dates now. You can see that my prepaid expenses line is gone now, because for all dates, right, that will also include those journal entry transactions that I put in. If we were to look at as of, let's just say, I think it's not going to be on there either. Let's look at 5/31. We have 1,000 left. That 1,000 was marked down in June, right? And if we look at all of our transactions, we can see that initial payment for our prepaid expenses, and then we're writing that down $1,000 each month. So the other thing that I can also look at is my profit and loss. And if I run this for 04/01 2023 through that quarter, and I look at months, this is why we want to do this, right? So we can see that consistent month over month expense hitting. You can also memorize the journal entry, right? So sometimes people want to create it one time and then come in and memorize it and have QuickBooks automatically enter that transaction for you. That is definitely another way to do it, right? So if I wanted to say memorize general journal and I wanted to automate it and have it go through on a monthly basis, then I could also do that as well. Set it up to be monthly. When's our next date? How many are remaining, right? If I wanted to do prepaid rent as an example, and I had 12 for a storage unit or something I was renting, you can also do it this way. I just like to go ahead and get them booked so I don't have to remember to go back and enter it, even though it will automate it, right? I just like to go ahead and have them in there. So then once I have those recorded, now we're going to look at some reporting. And if you attended the session last week, the report that we're going to be looking at for prepaid expenses is very similar to that one that we have for prepaid inventory. So to get to, right, as of the end of May, I can see on my balance sheet that I have $1,000 in prepaid expenses left. And if I had, you know, in this case, I just have one vendor that I have prepaid expenses to. So it's pretty straightforward. But imagine that we had 5 or 10 vendors that we were doing prepaid expense schedules for. This number here might not be as easy to know and to tie out as some of the other numbers on our balance sheet. So what we want to do is create a custom transaction detail report. And I'm going to come into custom report, custom transaction detail. I'm going to do this for all dates. We're going to filter on our prepaid expenses account. And I'm also going to filter on cleared is no. And I'm also going to put that we want a total by payee. So this shows us, right, if I wanted to see at the end of May, I have $1,000 on my balance sheet, and this shows me where that $1,000 is sitting, right? Who has that money that I've prepaid for some expenses. Now, if we had other prepaid expenses in here, those would all be listed as well with a subtotal for each vendor, right? What their unused prepaid is, and then getting to our total for that account. As part of a month-end close process, you do want to reconcile this prepaid expenses account. So at the end of May, I'm not going to see that June entry, right? So if I go and I say, banking, reconcile, and I say prepaid expenses, and I put in my May date, we're always going to be reconciling to a zero balance because at some point in time, right, our debits for a vendor are going to equal our credits. And if I hide transactions after statement's end date, you can see, right, we can't reconcile it yet because that $1,000 was, the remaining $1,000 is marked down in June. So I'm going to modify this and I'm going to say, let's pretend we're getting on there for June. And we can say mark all. Now, if I flip back over to my report now, right, and before I even reconcile, and I look at this through the end of June, see that asterisk there? That's just telling me that it is checked off in a reconciliation, but it has not, that reconciliation has not been completed yet. But once I hit reconcile now, I need to look at the reconciliation report, but you can see how those dropped off because they are already reconciled out. So any vendors that I still had unused prepaid balances with or prepaid expenses with would still be showing up on this report, but that outsourced IT provider that I've already marked down that quarter is going to be done. And then I might have a new one on here for Q3 at the end of June, right? It might have another 3,000 if I continue to use that same IT provider. Okay, we did have a question come in. So when you write a check, even if it is a prepaid account, it will show in the vendor list of transactions. By selecting name in the journal entry, won't that add additional transaction entries to the same thing? So when I talk about adding that name on the expense line as well, it's so if I go and look at my profit and loss report, and let's look at it for May, and I see this $1,000 here, I want to also see that name on that line as well. So if I say like, oh, I'm looking at me and I'm like, wait a second, we didn't pay anybody for outsourced IT services this month, because I know in my brain that we're paying them on a quarterly basis, but I didn't connect the dots that we do a prepaid schedule for them, then I'd be able to zoom in on here. And if I also had some other outsourced service providers that are going to that same account, but that I do not prepay, those are also going to have the name attached as well. So it can just help with some budgeting and getting into some of the details of what we're paying. So if we wanted to, look at outsourced services overall for all time and see what we've total, in total paid to different providers there, we want to make sure that we have the name attached there as well. I hope that answers that question. All right, so I think that is all I have for today. Thank you so much for attending. I did want to go ahead and go over the next couple webinars that we're going to have. So inventory mapping and why it is important is coming up next week. Sales orders and purchase orders for inventory is the following week. And then inventory tie out to balance sheet is what we're planning 3 weeks from now. So thank you so much. I hope y'all have a fantastic Wednesday.